welcome to MindShock True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire. I'm going to discuss what I would call a phenomenon, even though it's not really a phenomenon. That is innocent psychos, innocent scumbags, just innocent human garbage that are innocent of what they are accused and why it's dangerous to emotionally respond and become married to these character assassinations and correlating them directly with crimes that these individuals are accused of. And this is something you see in the true crime sphere all the time. I mean, even hardened aficionados with many years or even decades of studying criminology and true crime cases, they still fall for this, where they're indicting and condemning in the court of public opinion, so to speak, based on certain character traits, which, even if true, do not prove the guilt of someone, which is why I think the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt is a pretty good standard. It means pretty much for damn sure. Not possibly, not even probable, not even probably, not even high probability. Beyond any kind of reasonable doubt. So that means for sure as can be. Obviously, it might not be 100%, but 99.999%, basically for all intents and purposes, beyond any kind of doubting. So reasonable doubting, of course, you're not going to inject human clones and alien manipulations and interdimensional travelers. That's obviously, people would agree that that's not necessarily reasonable, unless of course there's definitive evidence of that. So if you're just going to speculate on that and then depend a court trial to account for that, that would not be reasonable. So these doubts have to be reasonable, but pretty much for sure. So let's say the analysis is correct. Let's just assume for the sake of argument, these people are pathological liars, psychopaths, sociopaths, the scum of the earth. Let's assume that's true. Obviously, I'm not saying that's true. Obviously, the evidence might not be there to suggest that that's true, but let's just assume for the sake of argument. Why would that mean they can't be innocent? Let's compare. How many psychopaths, sociopaths, pathological liars, and narcissists, how many of these people are walking around that don't kill people or are responsible for these heinous crimes in some of these famed true crime cases? A lot. So it seems really silly to indict them on their character. Character assassination, again, I'm not going to say it's not valid. You look at all available information, all available evidence. That can be evidence against them. But if that's all you have, that's a major problem. That's why, again, the legal standard in the United States, at least, is beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond, not within an approximate doubt. It's beyond. It's very clear. Beyond. Not approximate. So that's why you have to let physical evidence dictate these verdicts, because there are plenty of scumbags out there that don't commit crimes they're accused of. They might have committed a whole bunch of other crimes. They might have even killed other people. But here's the danger. Some people say, oh, well, who cares? They killed this other person. They should be in jail. Yes. If it's proven that they killed the other person, they should be in jail. However, there's another person out there that killed somebody who is not in jail because of this individual and this particular result. That's why this fallacious reasoning in deviating from beyond a reasonable doubt or these legal standards is so dangerous, because you have so many guilty people out there. Think about it. The nice guy down the street that nobody suspected, the nice guy or gal down the street nobody suspected, they're walking around laughing at how silly the idiot box watching public is, where they think they got the guy, the influence on the juries. They think they got the guy. Again, in the case of Scott Peterson, let's say for the sake of argument, again, I'm not saying Scott Peterson is innocent. This is MindShock, where the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. If you haven't checked out the MindShock Scott Peterson podcast, make sure to check it out because there are some stunning, mind-shocking coincidences of other victims washing up ashore, missing limbs. There's a lot of issues and coincidences that nobody talks about in the Scott Peterson case, the sightings specifically of Lacey Peterson by her neighbors. I mean, it's a little bit silly to mistake somebody who's your actual neighbor. It's not like she went to some crowded mall and people cited her. This is a different situation. Let's not fall for these false dichotomies and straw man logical fallacies. Someone who you are clearly familiar with and you see on a fairly often basis, obviously you're going to be less likely to mistake them. That doesn't mean you can't mistake them. Obviously, it's a theoretical possibility they could be mistaken. But when you're talking about multiple individuals citing her after the time that she's allegedly dead, that's a problem. Now, if Scott Peterson is this narcissistic, psychopath, sociopath, scum of the earth type individual, how hard is the true perpetrator laughing at everybody falling for it? Because if Scott Peterson is innocent, again, I'm not saying he is, but if he is, and the point of this podcast isn't specific cases. It's not about Amanda Knox or Scott Peterson. It's about, in general, the character assassinations that take place in the court of public opinion and how that influences juries and just even basic human psychology. Because if you're on a jury and you feel that a particular individual is lying about everything, which they might be a complete psychopath, they might be enjoying and relishing the attention, they might be happy that the victim is dead. They might be. Because if they're a terrible person, and they're happy, they wanted that person to die. They would never do it themselves because they're either too cowardly or they just never would. They were too, basically, for whatever reason, they just wouldn't do it or they didn't think they could get away with it, whatever the case may be. And if this person who they actually want dead, or that maybe they didn't specifically want them dead, but now that they're dead, they're happy that they're dead, they're going to behave in a certain manner. If you use that as evidence against them committing a crime instead of actual physical evidence, instead of using logic and reason to meet the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt, that's doing a great disservice to the victims. Because not only is it opening the door for many more wrongful convictions, false convictions, which are, again, the amount that have been discovered is just absolutely mind-shocking. Obviously, one is too many. But based on current numbers, it could be anywhere between 3 and 40% of people in prison that are innocent. Obviously, 1% is too many, and that's like a super conservative estimate. But when you have all of these millions of people imprisoned, we're not talking single digits here. We're talking a plethora of individuals that are wrongfully convicted, and it's not going to help by just using these character assassinations, because then victims don't get true justice. There is no true justice or closure just because you put somebody in prison. Again, maybe they are a murderer. Maybe they're a known murderer. But that means another individual, if they're not the murderer of the particular victim they were accused of murdering and are in prison for, that means the real murderer is still out there. That means that particular victim did not get justice. You could argue the other victim that the person killed, if they killed them, if that's all proven and true and they got off on a technicality, whatever the case may be, you can argue in that instance there's some justice there. But in terms of the victim that they didn't kill that they're sitting in prison for, there's no justice there. Because the guilty party is still out there that could be harming other individuals. Now, you could argue that if this is a known murderer, now in the case of, let's say, Amanda Knox or Scott Peterson, or even Casey Anthony, is there evidence that they killed other people or they would go on to kill more people if they weren't out? That's a little different. But in other cases where known murderers are convicted of people that are convicted of victims that they didn't actually kill, but they killed other victims, these are all unique situations and need to be approached as such. But a lot of these high-profile cases, like even O.J. Simpson, has he gone on to kill a whole bunch of people since being released? Did he kill a whole bunch of people prior? And does that mean he's guilty or innocent? Again, this is why we have to default to the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt, because that is a very, very logical standard. because you're basically making pretty damn sure you got the right guy instead of going off of these emotional responses to these people not being good people.